Good morning and welcome back to Morning at NTV. My name is Idris Matu and we have entered the last hour of Morning at NTV and we are having a guest in studio who is Mr. Francis Muhire, an economist from Makerere University Business School. Mr. Muhire, you are welcome on the show.
Thank you, Idris. Good morning, dear viewers out there.
For those who are not familiar with you, just tell us about yourself.
Well, as you've said, Francis Muhiri is my name. I'm an economist, another kid from Kabal after Shaka. Yeah, so, and I'm an economist, lecturer at MOBS.
At MOBS.
Yes.
Well, on April 19th, Amos Lugolobi threw out Matia Kasaija and ordered him to withdraw the proposed 4.4 trillion budget on grounds that it was not aligned with the country's national development plan, 3 goals. Now, however, in less than 2 months, Mr. Lugolobi was the man at Koro ceremonial grounds reading a budget that falls short of the aspirations in the National Development Plan. Now, to speak to us again, what are your takeouts from the budget that was read?
Thank you, Idris. First of all, you know, you've raised a very good concern, and but I'll talk about that in details. But let me first highlight just one takeaway. One important thing I saw that made me happy. It was about the tax that was imposed on gold. You know, initially they had proposed for 0.35%, and I think I was one of those few people that came out there and said, no, this is under taxation. And to make the matters worse, we've not been taxing gold, you know, since from the beginning. And yet Uganda is now currently our biggest export since 2018 is gold. We are the 35th largest gold exporter in the world. So I was happy to see that, you know, the government at least this time listened and, you know, they increased the tax imposed from 0.35% to 5% on processed gold and 10% of, you know, non-processed gold. So I was happy to see that. Yeah, but that's the only good thing I saw. But about your concern, you know, having a budget that is not in line with, let's say, the national development goals. This has been the major challenge we've been having in this country, and it has not just started to happen. It's been happening right out from the start since 1986. You know, the government will come, you know, with good programs, good themes, good titles. For example, look at the theme of this year's financial budget, you know, industrialization for inclusive growth, employment and wealth creation. Very, very good theme. And when you talk of the budget, of course, the main objectives of the budget is always about employment, you know, and having, you know, you have productive labor force, and at the same time, it is employed, it is, you know, maximized, and also you have a healthy population. But that is about the theme, which is in line with, let's say, the National Development Plan 3, same with Vision 2040. Now, when you go to the budget itself, how resources are allocated, now it is the opposite. It is upside down. First of all, look at the budget allocations. You have 34% going to debt repayment. I repeat this, 34% going to what?
Debt repayment.
To debit repayment. This time to confuse Ugandans, they didn't allocate these resources according to sectors. That's why you don't see like health or education. Especially they brought, you know, health and education, put it under human capital development. But how much has been allocated to human capital development? That is only 17%. You have 10 going to education and 7 going to health. For God's sake, we're in a pandemic. You're only allocating 70%, let's say 12, even if it is 10. So, but that was to confuse most of the Ugandans not to understand these things, and I think that's why I'm here to break it down for you. In the third position, you have governance and security, taking 15.6% of the total budget. So the question is, are we getting priorities right? I'm telling you, when you go back even up to 1986, we've always been getting our priorities very wrong. People have come out to talk, of course, economists have talked, but the government never listened. So I'm telling you, they say this, but they end up doing the opposite. And that is the problem. So even those resources that are allocated in those sectors, are they really well and efficiently maximized. I don't know if you got, according to the 2020 crime report for police of last year, Uganda lost over a quarter of the total budget allocation. That is around 11.7 trillion in corruption. That was through 143 embezzlement cases. What has the government done? While we were locked home, the thieves went to work active more than ever before. We are talking about a quarter of a budget, 11.7 trillion Ugandan shillings. During the State of the Nation, the president said that with this Ksanja, and I'm quoting him, he said, with this Ksanja, Katonda yamanyi, only God knows. What awaits for the corrupt people ahead is furnace. But you see, the president has been talking about this, everyone has been talking about corruption, and corruption is the biggest challenge in this country to the extent that has been normalized. Even what appears to be corrupt no longer appears to be bad. And this is bad when it becomes part of the culture.
Way things are done, yeah.
Yes. So we talk about corruption. You cannot just talk about corruption and ends there. You cannot handle corruption with a soft, with a soft approach. So while we are talking about coming up with all these programs, government programs, when it comes to implementation, when it comes to, realizing the results, that's where the problem is. But we are saying the budget is a tool which will tell you whether you're on the right path to go where you want to be or to your desired destination or not. And as I can assure you, Uganda, about 36 years ago, Uganda was among the poorest nations, last 10 poorest nations, and today we are still in that position. But you've seen other countries which have come out of this. For example, I'll give you an example of Korea. In 1962, Uganda and Korea were almost in the same age, in the same economic bracket.
Yeah.
And Uganda's size, we are 2 times bigger than South Korea. Our arable land is at 60%. South Korea's arable land is only at 22%. So how come that Uganda today, for example, GDP per capita is only at $823 USA dollars, and that of South Korea is 31,000. Yet we are almost at the same point.
For us, we are stuck in one place.
Yes. This all goes back to how you allocate resources. How you allocate resources is very important. For any economy to go through that socio-economic transformation, you have to allocate resources in the right sectors. Here we are talking about education and health first. Not where you have debt repayment and security taking the biggest shares. You need a very healthy population, but at the same time it has to be productive and equipped with the required skills. So I want to compare Uganda and South Korea because there is a very good comparison between those 2 countries. The other issue you have, when, for example, you look at this budget, over 46% of the budget allocations is going to salaries, stroke wages, and non-wages. This is recurrent expenditure. You're talking about 46%. This translates 21 trillion, shillings. It's going to do what? To pay for this huge monster government. One of the things that this government has steadily and progressively created is a huge monster government. You have the pyramid, on top you have the executive, you have the fishermen coming in, then you have fishermen, you have 81 cabinet ministers, you have MPs, you have about 529 MPs. When you look at their salary takeaways, I'm trying to show you, why you have a huge expenditure on this recurrent expenditure on salaries and non-salaries. So, still comparing with South Korea. South Korea today is a 1.6 trillion GDP economy, 12th. But in 1962, we are at the same point. Today, Uganda's GDP is around 30 billion US dollars. Do you know the number of ministers Korea has? The constitution mandates the government to have 15 to 30 ministers, but they only have 18, with 17 ministries. So, I've had this, this notion, people saying that, the other time I saw the MPs saying that you need a bigger government so that it will improve service delivery. Trust me, there is a negative relationship between the size of the government and service delivery. If that was the case, then Uganda would be the most developed nation. I mean, when it comes to the government, the whole government structure, Uganda competes with all these developed economies. So you're spending too much on recurrent expenditure and salaries and non-salaries, to treat, this government, especially on the top of the pyramid. You're giving them too much money in form of salaries, non-salaries, treating them like they're small goods. And that comes at a heavy cost. So that is the issue we have in this country. When it comes to priorities, we always get it wrong. Everyone says that, agriculture is the backbone of this country. Yes, I agree. We have a very huge potential when it comes to agriculture. But how much are we allocating to the agriculture sector? You're talking about only 3.8% of the total budget. 3.8%. Of that 3.8, you have only 500 billion shillings going to the Ministry of Agriculture. You have 100 billion going to NADS. You also have 100 billion going to NALO. And then you have 98 billion going to Uganda Coffee Development Authority. And all they are doing is to just distribute seedlings. And we are talking of, if you transform this economy, you need to invest heavily in the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector contributes about 23% of the total GDP, but it employs over 68% of Uganda's total labor force, according to UBOS's house survey that was done this year. So we know what to do. The government says, yes, this is what we're supposed to be doing in a normative way, but it ends up doing something different. You cannot talk of agricultural or agro-industrialization when you're not really investing or putting in much what you're supposed to be putting in. So Uganda has to arrange its priorities. And even to make the matters worse, even the little that is injected there, does it do the work it's supposed to do? Is there accountability? Uganda spends too much by their own accountability. When you see, we spend too much on accountability.
Caucuses to investigate. The
accountability they are doing is not there. So that's why we are saying that if you allocate the resources, even the few resources we have allocated to these sectors, what is the government doing to follow up to make sure that this money, is used efficiently? Because the other challenge we have in this country, we lack meritocracy. That you end up employing people not basing on merit, and this starts right away from the top position. That's why the president was trying to to defend his position of getting fishermen. But there is a huge cost. Once you don't consider merit, then when it comes to output, you should expect a disaster. And that's
what you put in is what you get out.
Exactly.
Now, Francis, just getting back to the conversation of the budget and its allocation, we have a situation that is COVID-19, and it has been here for now coming to 2 years.
Yeah.
And the budget was made and didn't really think about the second wave. And this is something that was forecast back in 2020, that a second wave is coming. But then we didn't budget for it. What does that say about our planning process?
Well, in this country, we seem to be planning, but we are not planning. Even the little planning we do, it is not followed. Where the problem? The system. You have a complete rotten system in this country. So, the budget is not talking about the COVID-19 impact. Can you imagine? But it is not by mistake, because very soon you're going to be seeing, loan requests coming in the name of, of COVID-19, because that's what happened, So the problem is that, as I've said, the whole issue is about the system. We are talking about the second wave, which is actually more serious than the first wave. And you don't know when COVID is going to go, by the way. You have South Africa and UK, which are going through the third, wave. There might be a fourth wave. So the question is, how are you prepared? What are you doing to mitigate the impact of COVID-19? I can assure you that the economic impact of COVID, we've just started to feel it. You saw inflation for the first time going high, and we are lucky because, food prices have been stable because we experienced good weather patterns. Otherwise, we would be in trouble. So The question is, what is the government doing about it? You know, for example, between May and June last year, the government borrowed over 822 million USA dollars in the name of combating or minimizing the cost of COVID-19. You saw money being pushed in Nemioga. I think that was the biggest scam. We never had what you call a stimulus package.
Why do you call it a scam?
Yeah, it's the biggest scam in this modern times of Uganda, but I'm going to explain that. So we never had a stimulus package. If you want to tell me that we had a stimulus package, then you don't know what you're talking about. And indicators have started to come out, by the way. We borrowed a lot of money in the name of combating the negative impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the economy. Today, Bank of Uganda is telling you that non-performing loans, you know, has risen to over 28%. You have around 800 billion, you know, in form of non-performing loans. Why? The money that was put in UDB, it was requested in the name of, you know, financing those struggling SMEs. Immediately, UDB got the money and said, no, this money is not meant for struggling business. This is to capitalize UDB. Go and follow up. I challenge you to go and investigate and see where that 445 billion went to. So now that was one. And as I've also told you that we lost over a quarter of the total budget. We're talking about 11.7 trillion shillings being lost in a snapshot last year. So now we borrowed huge sums of money. And that's why Uganda's GDP debt ratio increased by over 23%. We are talking about today that is around 47.6% of GDP debt ratio. So we borrowed a lot in the name of saying, you know, there is COVID here and there is a first wave. But what did that money do? Nothing. Now there's a second wave. The government will try to go and borrow again. But we are saying...
Because the second wave wasn't budgeted for.
Because we are saying, and even the third wave might come. But we are saying...
Which is likely to happen.
We are saying that 34% of budget allocations is going to debt repayment. Now, to make the matters worse, of that 34%, you know, you have 19.1, which is going to be, you know, domestic from the domestic market, the debt repayment from the domestic market. In other words, the government is going to borrow in order to service another debt, and it is targeting at the domestic market. Do you know the implication of that on the business sector within this country?
Because then we have to pay tax too.
So you're going to borrow from the domestic market. You're looking at about 8.5 billion Ugandan shillings. You're going to be competing with the already struggling business sector, the private sector. And you know, when it comes commercial, commercial banks, they will prefer to lend the government, you know, because the other issue you have in this country about the banking sector, it's more of an oligopoly market structure. Already they have that power to set the prices. Now the government comes, the biggest borrower, you know, then the private sector, you and I, won't be able to get or access, you know, the capital. But at the same time, the government is going to tax us. And that takes us to the taxes. While I was up about, you know, the taxes on the minerals, you have the other challenge of other taxes which are not favorable and which are coming at a very wrong time. Talk about rental income, that is 30% per unit. The government is targeting the landlords because they think they have the money. But do you think it is the landlord who's going to end up paying this tax? It is a tenant. You know?
Which is damaging. Francis, you've mentioned something important about the government having to borrow from domestic tax to pay back. And probably even we shall borrow from international
Of
funders.
course.
What are the implications of such a situation? Because we've seen such things happen in economies like Ghana and other African countries like Zimbabwe. What are some of the implications that might actually affect our country or even our economy? Could we be facing things like inflation?
Even before we talk of inflation, you know, Uganda has been recognized as the most entrepreneurial country. And Ugandans should be given this. Ugandans, we are hardworking people. We when you compare Uganda with other people, they will tell you how hardworking we are. We are entrepreneurs, we want to work.
Creative.
And creative. But the problem is the environment we are operating in. The government is the biggest enemy of this country.
Francis.
How? I'm telling you this. I'm telling you this current government, and I'm telling you why. For example, when you talk of 19.1% of the total budget to be coming from the domestic market, you're going to borrow. Where is the private sector going to borrow from? And you already have domestic areas of about 400 billion. The private sector, you know, that's 400 billion what the government owes to the public sector. Aren't you killing the private sector, the entrepreneurial, you know, whole environment? So the implication is it goes to the price of interest rate on the market. Uganda's interest rate on the market on average is around 21%. It is one of the highest in the whole world. So the cost of capital is very high, or it is expensive in this country. And one of the reasons is because of the government, because the government is the biggest borrower, both from domestic and even from external sources. All these commercial banks will prefer to lend to the government than you and me or the private sector. So the implication is about the cost of capital, which will go high. But as I'm saying that while this has a very huge negative impact on the economy, on the domestic economy, at the same time, you're bringing more taxes. You're imposing more taxes. That's why I call those taxes as pandemic tax. While Uganda, we are going through a COVID-19 pandemic, we're also going through a taxation pandemic in this country. For example, there is another tax bill which I think is on the president's table. That is the capital gains, you know, by real estate. That if you have your property and you want to sell it, you have to pay 30% of it, on top of other taxes like VAT. You know,
that is being discussed?
It is on the president's table, but it's not yet passed, you know. So when you bring such fiscal policies that are not favorable, then you're killing the economy. You need to feed this cow, then it will give you milk. The thing is we are borrowing in the name of spending on what is not necessary. Uganda is too poor to be spending on luxury. I gave you an example of the recurrent expenditure, 46% of total budget going through recurrent expenditure. And this is only salary and non-salary. How much money are you paying the ministers, the allowances, the MPs?
Retirement packages.
The member of parliament in Uganda earns 2 times more than an MP in Spain. And you're talking about a 1.3 trillion economy. So we are spending more than our capacity. And we are now addicted to debt that we can borrow, because you know you always have those who want to borrow you. And Uganda has become addictive. That's why even after borrowing, immediately we say, please forgive us. Because you know what happened in 2006. You know, Uganda was forgiven almost its entire debt. So we have been at that point where the government is addicted of borrowing. But you know, when you start to borrow, spend on what you're not supposed to be spending on, and then you're asking it to be forgiven. This money comes actually at a cost. Besides the interest rate or the quantitative cost, you also have the qualitative cost.
Francis, from you as an expert, because personally I'm not an economist, from all the things you've been saying today, it looks like there is wrong planning, there is wrong execution, and probably there are wrong people who are making these policies in the government. Why are these people given these positions who cannot actually plan for the country?
Thank you. Just as I told you that the whole system is completely broken, and you know, God help us, it needs a complete downpour and we start afresh, because the whole system, as I've told you, you know, you have a government which has been running for the last over 36 years, you know, the whole system. The point here is the government should rethink of how it's doing business. One, spend on what you're supposed to be spending. First, know your position. That yes, Uganda, I'm a poor country, but with potential to develop into a middle income or even a developed economy. But I have to start by spending according to my budget. Then, what is my strength? we are saying that I don't support this notion that taxation should be the main source of government revenue. Look at the natural resources, the minerals. I'm telling you for the first time, it's now that we're going to be taxing gold, meaning that it has been living out of the country, freely, not taxed at all.
Who has been exporting this gold? Are you aware of that information?
Well, when you look at the whole business structure of, let's say, minerals, and this is a key, it's a key sector which should be taken up by the government. But when you look at the way business is done, it's run by few local mafias and international mafias. Yeah. So I challenge you to go and find out exactly those who are dealing in it. But,
I might not find out.
But what I can tell you is that when you look at the gold business in Uganda, initially it was controlled by about three Asian families. But now we've seen other partners coming in. So, but the whole thing is that the government has to know its position. Uganda, at the moment, we're a poor country. We shouldn't be spending much competing with other developed nations, yeah, than spend on important things. When you talk of economic transformation, rearrange your priorities. Spend much money in real sectors which are going to pull big masses of people from poverty. And here we're talking about education, you're talking about health, and you're talking about agriculture. Because economic transformation goes through three channels. One, we have to first go through agricultural revolution, an agricultural revolution, then develop the manufacturing sector, and then the service sector. Why the agricultural revolution first? Because the agriculture sector is the one which feeds the almost 90% of inputs for the manufacturing sector. So the manufacturing sector creates more decent jobs than the agriculture sector. But before you develop the manufacturing sector, you need the agriculture sector. There is no shortcut. That's why the North Americas did, USA and Canada. That's what Europe did. That's what East Asia is doing. That's what Latin America is doing. Then the other point is, we should develop a culture that, first of all, if you want to develop, before you even say I don't have what to save, and then invest. That's why I told you look at your strength. Look at the natural resources, where you can get the money from. The tourism sector, beside the pandemic in the equation, we have a potential there. You cannot, for example, when you look at the Asian tigers, what they did, it is, according to theory, it requires about 15% for a country to take off. Save at least 15% of your GDP, and then you'll use this money to invest it. But we saw Asian tigers, countries saving over 46%. This comes at a cost. This comes at a cost. You're sacrificing this current generation. That's what we call third gratification, so that the next future are going to benefit from this. So one of those countries did that. China, when you look at China's story, where they're coming from, you have to make that sacrifice. Not doing the opposite. For us, instead of sacrificing, how much are we saving? No, nothing. All we are doing is borrow and spend. That is total manyana. You're spending what you don't have. And that's why we are heavily indebted. The future generations are going to come and they will be wondering, where were we when these things were happening? So that's why this should be, it's not only for economists, but for every Ugandan, everyone should be responsible. These are things we should not allow to happen. People should stop thinking that politics does not concern me, so I should not really be bothered by such things. That is the biggest problem I have in this country. I know. Well, Mr. Francis, thank you so much for coming through. Very informative information that you've given us, and very in-depth and truly important to know. Always a pleasure. Well, that has been Mr. Francis Muhire, who is an economist. And for you who would like to know more information, just go to our social media pages or YouTube. This conversation will be uploaded for your intake, double intake, and in-depth analysis. Well, that has been all that we have for you on Morning at NTV. My name is Idris Matu, and I'll see you tomorrow.